Well, I have had a flood of nostalgia. Last night, we attended my nephew's wedding in a place called Camp Dakota, which is just south of Batesville. And it is where the spark first flew with Matilda and me. Oh my goodness. Where they got married was the exact it's a camp, so it's got this pole open gymnasium like a lot of camps have, and they had actually even arranged the seats the same way that they were arranged for our first worship service together. And it was hot and muggy, and it felt exactly the same way it did that Sunday that we were worshiping. And Matilda had on this little flower dress that sleeves came way up here, and I was sitting right next to her. It was the first time I was brave enough to let my pinky touch her arm, and oh man, I knew it was real. I knew it was real in that moment, and we've just been reliving that. Oh man, held hands all last night in bed. It was just wonderful. It was just great to remember. It reminds me, I think one reason that marriage love is so beautiful is because our Creator is such a great lover. And he's wanting, I think that's why he created marriage, so that we'd get a little bit of a window into what he's trying to create in us with him. This bride, whatever we're headed toward, this beautiful connection. And it really is what is underneath this whole chapter that we've looked at for the last 2 months on faith. All of this was the dare chance that these people took to think that God really might be this great. He really might be this wonderful lover that wants to be known and wants to be experienced and connected with. In fact, the author of Hebrews admits that he doesn't have time to talk about all of these stories of faith from the Old Testament heroes. He mentions some of them starting in verse 32 through the end of the chapter. Gideon, Samson, David, Samuel. The list goes on and on of all of these, so many faith stories to learn from, and then for us to pass on to our friends and family and kids and grandkids. But he does mention one more in these first 8 that are spoken of in this Hall of Faith list. And she's something. And it comes in verse 31. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. The prostitute Rahab, she was a Canaanite woman that is mentioned 8 times in Scripture. 6 of those times that she's mentioned, this description of her lifestyle it's always Rahab the prostitute. Only 2 times that description of who she was is not mentioned. She's likely a temple prostitute for the idol-worshiping Canaanites. Looks like, from what we see in Scripture, the bits and pieces we can pick up, she was probably a fairly wealthy woman. Her home was on Jericho's outer wall, serving as both likely a brothel and perhaps a business in growing or buying flax. In fact, it looks like she dried that flax on her rooftop and used it to produce linen. And she would dye the linen, and it looks like one of her favorite colors was crimson. Yeah, you'll see more about that story as you read it yourself. Best we can tell, she was some kind of a businesswoman who had a place that would receive travelers, and obviously she made several services available to any who would come to her place. Rahab and those living in Jericho had been hearing the stories of the Israelites, stories about them escaping from the Egyptians, being freed from their bondage, fantastic, miraculous deliveries through a sea, and this bread that fell from heaven that sustained them as they were making their way through the wilderness. Some people actually think that Rahab heard these stories. One commentator said it might very well have been pillow talk from some of the travelers. Oh, you got to hear about these Israelites and their God. The irony of this, though, is all the people in Jericho that were hearing about the Israelites and their God, it seems that only one resident in the entire city dared to put their trust and faith in Israel's God. In fact, it would so grow inside of Rahab that it would become a place of trust and obedience, as we see the story unfold. She had her ear to the ground because she wanted to know more about what she was hearing about this God of Israel. And I suspect that when Joshua sent the 2 spies into Jericho, the city, to check it out, I suspect that Rahab was pretty much aware of who came in and out of the city. And when she found out it might be spies, I bet she was the one that intercepted them. All we know is they ended up at her place, and the king of Jericho found out about it, and he sent word. He sent word to Rahab, those two guys that you're housing, I want to see them. So he sent soldiers to collect them. When the soldiers came, why, Rahab quickly hid Joshua's men up on her roof underneath some of the stalks of that flax. And the king's men came, and she told them that, oh man, you just missed them. They left out. If you could hurry, you might be able to catch him. So those soldiers quickly set out in pursuit of Rahab's misdirection. And when the danger was gone and the city gates were shut for the night, Rahab's faith continued to move her. Look what the text says in Joshua chapter 2 and verse 8. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all we who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God, look at this confession. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men reassured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. Now let me say something again that I said just a second ago. Even though everyone in Jericho was hearing about the Israelites and the Israelites' God, it looks to be that only one resident in the entire city dared to believe that these stories about this God were true. And she stepped out in faith. Specifically, that's the first point I want us to consider. What it says in Hebrews chapter 6, verse 31, it says that she was looking for God's people. She found them. She welcomed them in. And when she found them, she invited them, she protected them, and then she would eventually ask them even for help. And I was thinking about how that kind of applies to us at CPC. Do you know it's not an accident that we're all together here? This is the way it's supposed to be. We're here together on purpose. This isn't just some random chance on this day in May that we just, boom. No. This is on purpose. And I was thinking about that. We've all been curious about this God of Israel that we read about in the Bible and that we see evidences of here on earth. And it's what has kind of drawn us together in connection, because I know that you're looking for him and you know that I'm looking for him, and so we're starting to say, hey, what do you know? What have you found out? Could you share it with me? And it's pulling us together. We're inviting each other over. And we're sharing meals together. And we want each other to be safe. And when somebody needs something, they speak up and they say, I need help. At least that's what we're trying to be. We obviously can improve, but that's what God is building here at this congregation. And I know that there can be ways that we can get better in this. Instead of waiting for somebody to look for you, maybe instead of waiting for someone to talk to you, someone to welcome you or invite you, maybe all of us could kind of see ourselves as the initiator. And we would go. Even at the end of this service, there's going to be people here that you don't talk to very much. You see, but even before you go out the door, maybe you would be that one that would go up and just say, I don't know you very well yet, but I really want you to know I'm happy you're here. Thank you for coming. Just one little moment. I'm thinking a text or a conversation or a hug or one couple to another couple. Hey, let's go out late for pie and coffee. Let's just spend time. Maybe it would even express itself in service. We see this young couple with these kids, and we can see that they're just trying to hold it together. Drop the kids off at our house, and the two of you go out a night on us. Just go out. Or do you just want to date? Just go out. We'll watch the kids. Y'all have some time. Something. Maybe it would even express itself by you calling somebody and saying, listen, I've kind of formulating a prayer list for this week, and I'd really like to pray for you every day. If that's okay, is there something specific that I could pray about for you every day? That little moment of initiation and contact, faith looks for connection with God's people. It's what it does. And Rahab shows us something else here too. Look what happens in Joshua chapter 6 and verse 25. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. You guys, this was approximately 1,450 years before Jesus was born. Oh, I gotta share a little bit more about this first. Jewish legend has it that there were 4 stunningly beautiful women in the Old Testament. One, Esther, Queen Esther, knockout. Another one, Abraham's wife, Sarah. You remember, even in her old age, kings were hitting on her. Remember that? And another one, can you imagine a woman being so beautiful? When Jacob saw Rachel, it actually brought emotion to him. She was so stunningly beautiful that he actually began to cry a little bit. And guess who the 4th one was? Rahab. Cool, isn't it? You know what else legend has? Legend actually says, Jewish legend says that she ended up marrying one of the spies. I can't base this on any truth. It's not in the Bible, but it's cool to think about. It's just fun. Well, let's go on here. We don't read anything more about Rahab for nearly 1,500 years until we get all the way over to the New Testament, and Matthew is talking to the people, to the Jews that he's writing to. And it says in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 5, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. So you see this connection. Remember Boaz? Boaz, the one who got older in his life, and then Ruth came in, and she was the Moabite. She was a Gentile woman, but Boaz knew what it was like to have a Gentile mama. And the endearment that he felt toward his mom, Rahab, he might have even grown up with a little bit of shame because everybody knew that Rahab wasn't a Jew. So he waits and all this time, and then here comes this beautiful Moabite woman, and he's thinking, my mom was a Gentile. She was terrific. Who knows? We're just kind of guessing, aren't we? But isn't this a beautiful thing? Here, she dares to believe the stories that are being told about this Israelite God. And the next thing you know, she doesn't seek the security of this walled city in Jericho, which no army was able to overtake. But hearing about this God of Israel, she dares to believe in him and says, you know what? I've got a pretty good life here. I've got a lot of things going on, and I'm respected in some ways, and people kind of like me, and I'm right on the city wall. But you know what? This God of Israel has captured me. And I'm willing to let it all go. She lets it all go, and she becomes the great-great-grandmother of Israel's most famous king, King David. More importantly, through Rahab's line, there was eventually a son named Joseph, who married a virgin named Mary. And Joseph straight from the Rahab line, was the one who said, yeah, I'll be a dad to this one, Jesus. Rahab's faith not only looked for God's people, it was a faith that allowed her to trust in God's plan. That's the second point. And what a transformation from an object of wrath to a child of heaven. From a shady lady to a shining star. From disgrace to dignity. From a call girl to a girl called. From the house of shame to the hall of fame, the hall of faith. You know, I have heard this story taught and preached many times. It's a fantastic story, the story of Rahab the prostitute. It's usually at some point in the sermon, the preacher or the teacher says, and if God could use a prostitute, surely he could use you. As if prostitution is worse than anything else. You know what I think about that? Y'all, sin is sin. Pick your poison. We're all guilty. Are you not guilty? What makes the story of Rahab so utterly insane is not what Rahab did. It's that God saw her faith and sought her out. I mean, he was the one that passed the travelers' stories on about him that ended up telling her. It's never been about our selfish choices. It's always been about God's love. A sacrificial love that'll do whatever it takes to find faith. And when he finds it, man, he's just flaming it to fire. We're so quick to rush with judgment toward other people who struggle with whatever. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that we're really quick to judge people who maybe struggle with a sin that we don't struggle with anymore, and we're on them? Or worse yet, we're really judgmental against people who struggle with a sin that we've never struggled with. Well, who could fall into that kind of... And you guys, it just brings it back to me. I heard a funny story about a prosperous young Wall Street broker who fell in love with a beautiful young woman. And he wanted to marry her, but he was a cautious guy. And we all, do we ever really know one another perfectly, see each other's heart? He was cautious. So he decided to hire a private investigating firm to check her out before he proposed to her. And he thought it wise because he had both a growing fortune and he had a really good reputation, and he wanted to protect that. Makes sense in a way. But he did have a request with the agency. The agency that he hired, he said, whatever investigator in your agency that you give this job to, I don't want him to know that it's me that's hiring you. The main purpose he didn't want to know the investigator to know it was him is because he didn't want that to find its way back to this girl he was going to propose to. How would you feel, ladies? A guy, secretly did that behind you. He didn't want her to find out, okay? He was wanting to be cautious. He's wanting to, kind of cover his bases, but yet he didn't want to hurt what he had with her. So the agency said, all right, we'll do it. They hired the investigator. He checked out this woman, and the report was mailed to this broker's house. This is what it said. The young lady in question has an unblemished past and a spotless reputation. Her friends are of the highest moral character, and she doesn't even have a traffic ticket on her record. But, the report concluded, the one negative I could find is that she's often seen around town in the company of a young broker with questionable reputations. You guys, that's why I said, prostitution or pride? Harlotry or gossip? Sexual immorality or self-righteousness? That's why I said pick your poison. We're all guilty. All of us. This story of faith is not about where we've been or what we've done. It's about daring to trust what we've heard about this God of Israel, this God of the Bible. Could it be true? Could it be true that nothing could separate us from his love? Here's a question. Is where you've been and what you're doing revealing your trust in God and his plan, or is it indicating that you've placed your trust somewhere else? Last week, I had someone send me this text. I actually copied it off and put it on the screen. This person said, perhaps the last sermon in this series that we're doing right now can focus on what we hope has been learned and how we can implement these principles in our lives. That really challenged me. I thought, okay, what are we learning? I kind of went back. You know what I did? I went back to all of these sermons that we've preached the last 2 months. And I prepared a slide that has each one of these 8 people that we've looked at and the main points that we tried to. You'll notice in your programs, I put it as an insert on your program. And pop it on the screen right now. We're going to whip through this really, really quick right now, very, very briefly, just to kind of remember it again. And I thought maybe some of you don't want to keep up with the paper that's in the program. Maybe some of you I see you already got your phones out. You're just taking a picture of this just to have it on your phone. Let's go through it and let me make a quick comment about it. Okay, Abel, we remember in Hebrews 11:6 it says, without faith, it's impossible to please God because He is pleased by those who believe that He exists and those who diligently seek Him. And with Abel, we saw that he had such a firm belief in the existence of God, and it was reflected in his sacrifice, and it made his worship acceptable. So that was the first thing we saw. And then to go with that, we also saw that Enoch actually found out that a walk with God could be found. And he found it through diligently seeking Him. We saw that in the little bit that we have about Enoch. So that was the first 2. And then Noah, we found that he would heed unseen warnings, and he would protect his family's future no matter what it took, what it cost, and he would remain faithful regardless, especially in a world at the time where every heart was bent on evil. Faithlessness all around, but there Noah stood with faith. Abraham, we found out, hey, when you're called, follow. Don't question, follow. And even when the call is something that looks impossible, you just believe it anyway. Somehow the impossible God is going to make the impossible happen. And then the hardest part with Abraham, whatever is requested, then you make sure and offer that. You might have to look in your program. I see that it popped off the screen. They're trying to get it back up. Look at that little piece on your program if you want to follow along. With Jacob, we found out that faith blessings are both given and received. Jacob received it from his dad, Isaac, and then he passed it on to his boys and his grandsons. And then faith blessings are to be given before death. And then faith blessings are to be for the future. We speak future blessings into these children and grandchildren. And then these blessings are done through the mode of worship. We're offering them to God, just as Abraham did. So there was Jacob. And Joseph, Nathan took us last week to faith forms our thoughts, and then those thoughts grow to actions. Remember the passage, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So we let these thoughts consume us, and the next thing you know, our behavior begins to change. With Moses, we saw that faith sees children as extraordinary. And faith chooses truth over everything all the time. And faith obeys regardless of what instruction comes. I'm going to obey. I know this instruction seems pretty bizarre, but I'm going to obey. And faith follows through. No matter what the obstacle, even if it's a big body of sea, well, God's going to get us through somehow. And sure enough, faith follows through. And then what we just saw this morning with Rahab. Faith looks for God's people. And then faith trusts in God's plan. You remember the adage, if you aim at nothing, you're sure to hit it? I thought maybe what we need to do is just have this in front of us. So we put it in the program and we got it up here, and some of you are already taking the picture. Maybe what we need to do is put this someplace where we can see it regularly. And say, okay, now these were the qualities of faith. These are the 8 people that are mentioned in this chapter. Maybe if I could just kind of run through that time and again, maybe it would begin to have an effect. You guys, you know what gets me about these 8 people more than anything else? Every single one of them had a reason to doubt. Do you think Moses had a moment of, put my staff over what? The water? What? Every one of them had a reason to question. You think Abraham had a thing to question about? You wait till I'm 100 to give me this boy, and then you tell me to turn around and what? Every one of these people had a reason not to believe. To say, you know what, I heard what you're saying, God, but do you think Rahab had that? Living the kind of life that she lived and all of the security and enjoyment that she lived? Do you think there was a part of her that said, I don't know. I know they're talking about this God of the Israelites that have been wandering through the wilderness and all that, but I'm pretty good with where I am right here. Every one of them had the reason to doubt, had reasons to question, had reasons not to believe. But they each one chose to believe anyway. In spite of all of the people around them, nobody else in the entire city had any inkling of faith in God. Rahab was the only one. What would it take for us to live like that? You know what it hit me on the bottom line? The bottom line is God's word trustworthy? Is this God that we're hearing about, that we read about in the Bible, is he worthy of our trust? If he is, then we've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. Everything. Give me faith to trust in what you say, that you're good. And your love, oh man, Matilda, I love you so much. Your love, Jesus, is so great. It's what makes this great. It's what he intended. Oh, let's pray.